Hello, everyone. Welcome to Arash's World. Today, we have a very special guest, Robert Thurman, and he is, among many other things, he's a scholar as well, an expert on Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. So I'd like you actually, Robert, welcome to Arash's World. And I'd like you just to present yourself before we dive into talking about your wonderful book, your most recent book as well that you've written. But how would you describe yourself in any way you like?
Okay, well, I'm a great-grandfather of one and a half girls, because one that wasn't quite born yet, one of them. And then I'm a grandfather of about 8 kids and a father of 5 kids. And I'm a retired professor of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist studies at Columbia University, and I'm still, therefore, as an emeritus, I'm still somewhat connected to them, sorry. And I am, writing, and I also, my main work, the remaining work now, besides finishing a bunch of big translations from Sanskrit and Tibetan, is I'm still the head of Tibet House US, the Dalai Lama's cultural center in America, with the mission to try to preserve and promote Tibetan culture because it's endangered under the Chinese communists in Tibet. And we have also a country retreat place called Menla Mountain Retreat, where we offer Tibetan healing practices, very, a little humbly offer that, and to show off Tibetan cultural wisdom, you could say. And that's sort of my love now. I just had my 80th birthday, and this book, the book that you are reading, was published on that day, thanks to the kindness of the editors. They picked that day, and I'm quite happy. Actually, somehow now I'm facing the 9th decade, and I had a note from the Dalai Lama, who's in the middle of it at 86, and he encouraged me to keep going at a slow and modest pace, not to have like a heart attack or something.
Wonderful.
So I'm trying to do that. So that's introducing me, and well, let's say all my motives have to do with. I'm a disciple of Greta Thunberg, let me say. I consider her Mother Gaia, Mother Earth's oracle, and a transmitter of the pain and unhappiness of Mother Earth, to see the suffering of the animals, not just the humans, but all the animals on the earth in the 6th great extinction. And so I'm very dedicated during this 9th and, if necessary, 10th decade, to get us to do the radical changes we need to change the fossil fuel domination of our politics on the planet and globally. And I'm very, very strong about that. And I do feel that my sort of happiness push and cheer up push, which is what really the book is about. It isn't about Buddhism. I don't want to convert anybody to Buddhism. I'm a half-baked and half-witted Buddhist myself, although I keep trying. But I really want people to cheer up, because I feel that the reason that the planet as a whole is that the different societies are not really doing it is that people are too defeatist. They think it's impossible. And leadership and ignorant and stubborn leadership persists in the destructive behaviors, leading us in the wrong ways in terms of war and consumerist greed. And therefore, we are not reacting with like the house is on fire, as Greta says, and putting out the fire, which we should be doing. So that's my main drive, is that, I don't want to convert anybody to anything except to happiness. Mm-hmm. That's my only aim, actually.
And this is grandpa. This is the book, the most recent book. It's a wonderful book. I've started reading it, and I love wisdom is bliss. So it's not ignorance, it's wisdom. That is important to note.
That's right.
And you actually had me here with 4 friendly, fun facts. Fun facts. Those are 3 words that are very important, and I love how you are combining them here. And the other thing I am quite impressed with is just like that joyous energy that you have, and that comes through in your book. And the language, and it's scholarly, but at the same time, it's very accessible. And I'm someone who was interested in Buddhism since I was a teen. and I loved it. And however, I think a lot of the terms I misunderstood. And reading through your book, I realized, well, there's some things that when you were younger too, you misunderstood as well. So I wasn't completely off. But the whole issue of nirvana and the whole issue of the ego and attachment. And I understood the Four Noble Truths, but the Eightfold Path seemed confusing to me, and how and why, and what is the ego. And so I went on this basically quest, and I tried to actually deny the ego and say, yeah, ego is wrong, ego is bad. I want to escape the ego and escape life. And there was a point in my life where I said, I want to go to a monastery, and as a teen, idealistic teen, and I want to just like find enlightenment. But then I thought, no, if I want to find enlightenment, I want to find it here in the world, and be part of it. And so I decided not to. And then I drifted off, and there's also Christianity. There's certain parts of Christianity that I like. And there's certain parts I don't like. And I love how you're calling Jesus sweet Jesus. And to me, my relationship with Jesus is a fun guy, somebody who is playful, who turns water into wine, and who hangs out with kids and prostitutes and poor people and sick people, who's a rebel. And I was also impressed reading that the Buddha, and I hadn't thought of this, but the Buddha was also a rebel, because he stood out against the people. And also the idea of Christianity, was Jesus a Christian? Technically, I think he is not. And he would oppose to many things.
Jesus was a rabbi, of course.
Yeah. And so the idea of religion being all about sin and suffering and pain turned me off. And that was actually the thing also with Buddhism, because when it's like life is suffering, it's like, I don't know.
Yes, right.
But then I'm reevaluating it, and I went another path. And I've gone the path of Freud and psychoanalysis myself. Kind of my meditation was that. And then I realized, I got to a point where I said, isn't this exactly what Buddhism is talking about? And then I saw the connections between the two. So it's quite amazing that the ego, my misconception is that you actually don't hate the ego. It's just the ego is like a small child within us. That is confused, that is ignorant, that is misbehaving, and that there is a self that is higher than that, that can actually expand.
Absolutely. That's a great journey you're describing. I think it's wonderful. So how does that interact with what you learned in the book? How does that fit in a good way, or how does it go?
In a wonderful way. So, for example, it's kind of actually a bit uncanny, because I was taking a walk a couple of weeks ago, and I was thinking about the idea of nothing, something, and everything. And I thought, like, well, nothing can come out of nothing, and that's something we say. But that actually can mean both things. That can mean nothing can come out of nothing, or nothing can come out of nothing in the affirmative. That is possible that nothing comes out of nothing. And that led me to the thought of everything. Now, everything includes, does it include nothing? So if it includes nothing, then everything is also part of nothing, and therefore there is no difference between nothing and everything. And some of those words I read in similar paths, I read in your book, and I was quite amazed. And can we maybe talk about that? About the difference between
well,
nothing,
that's very key. That's the key point. That's actually the very key source, of love and compassion, which is what we all want, and what is reality. Actually, that's why wisdom is bliss. When we come to know that, and the way of coming to know that is to realize that nothing is nothing, and it is not included in everything, except as the word for something that isn't included, because it's not there. And therefore people can't and don't need to fear going to nothing, because there's no there sort of thing. And that's why the word emptiness has often been, in East Asian Buddhism, sometimes it's been confused with nothingness. But in the Sanskrit language and Tibetan language and so forth, there are different words for nothingness and emptiness. And emptiness is the space where everything happens.
Exactly. And so it's everything.
Nothing cannot contain everything, because nothing isn't there. But it's and it's a good concept, however, within everything, because it is the concept for that which doesn't have a referent, because it's not there. And the mistake made by the nihilists, who are not the only kind of materialists, but unfortunately they're the dominant kind of materialists now, who think, who are at the anchor, they're like the authority of the dominant materialist culture. And therefore they lead to the sort of recklessness of our culture and our destruction of nature and our moral recklessness and ethical recklessness by thinking that we can do things and there'll be no consequence of what we do because we'll be nothing, because nothing is sort of underlying there. And actually, I just learned something really new talking to people, in sort of talking about the book, because I've been doing that now since it just came out. And I came up with some new thing, it's natural that we gravitate to nothingness because we look out in the sky at night and we see these little pinpoints of stars and planets, that we have a model of in our mind. And then, or we go into having a thought experiment in our mind and we think of being made of atoms and molecules. And then we think of the atom as a dark space with little things zipping around in it. And it's pretty mystery how that turns into a nice soft cheek with a dimple and a smile like you nicely have. And how can those little zapping things in an empty space? So we sort of think that if everything stops, and in our experience, that we'll just be that dark space. We naturally think that, and therefore we sort of expect to reach a state of unconsciousness at death, and that's what death is, and we therefore fear it in case we're enjoying being alive. Although we seek it, on the other hand, when we're finding it being alive to be painful. Really painful, people automatically seek that because they think that's like getting anesthesia in the dentist chair, which you want at that time. You don't want to have to sit there while they're drilling on a nerve. So the thing is about that, though, is therefore the realization that nothing is, in fact, nothing. There's another thing that could be invisible that could be our destiny. And what is the other thing that's invisible other than darkness? You know what I mean? Where you're unconscious. And then I realized, well, of course, transparency is invisible. For example, right now you look to your left and you look out that window and you see whatever is outside there. But the glass itself is not visible to you because it's transparent. Maybe if you were installing it and looking from the side, you'd see a pane of glass. And it's there in a way, but you don't see it when you look at it because it's invisible, because it's transparent. So instead of dark matter and dark energy being the glue that holds these little zapping atoms together, which is the final desperate last stand of the materialist physicists, 97% of nature is dark energy and matter, but has to be, or everything would fly apart, and has to be, but we don't really know what it is because we didn't see it yet. Yeah. But instead of that being the case, it could be that we are bathed in a bath of infinite energy, which is transparent to us, and we're also made of it. But we wrongly think, no, this coffee cup here, this teacup, this tea mug is not transparent, and I can't see through it, and it's solid, and never mind that it's made of atoms that are mostly penetrable, by X-rays or whatever. Superman can see through it, but I can't. But the point is, the idea is we're all potentially Superman in that respect, that we could see through everything, or we could choose to see it as it presents itself to an ignorant person, because just because we would learn to see through it, that wouldn't mean that everybody else could, and we want to relate to everybody else. So then we get into the area of where actual life, not just nirvana, but actual, and not just clear light of the void, as we like to call it, clear light of emptiness. Not just that, but life itself is inexpressible. I mean, we know Arash, we know you're a guy, we know you're in that room there in Vancouver, we know that you've been seeking things since you were a teen, you explained it beautifully, etc. We know all that, and we could have 100 different status and analyses and descriptions, molecular, chemical, medical, or spiritual, whatever. None of them would add up to the inconceivability that is Arash. Life itself is beyond anybody's description. That's why we love poets, because they give us new angles that we never thought of about something, but they never exhaust the thing. They just sort of go on a vector, like across a facet. If someone wrote a poem about Arash, even that would not be the final word. There is no final word. That's a great thing. And therefore, we can talk a lot about Arash, if you follow me. So Nirvana is just the same. It's the reality of everything, but itself is inexpressible. And it doesn't exclude even the ignorant vision. It embraces it in a loving and liberating way. And how do we access that experientially, of course? It's just like, how do you be Arash during the day? You don't look up on a computer all the statistics about Arash. You just get up and you do your thing.
And he's not the same person he is now than he was a few years ago. So there's that
we can say all of that.
We go through.
Yeah, you can say in some senses you are the same. In some senses you're different. Yeah. When you see a picture of yourself doing something or a video, when you're a little kid, you can kind of remember, sometimes you can remember what you were doing, and you seem to be there then when you remember that in your memory. And so in one way we are, in one way we're different, and we're different every minute, and we seem the same. In other words, words are always only giving us a partial picture type of thing. And the trick is, how do we become open to the experience of being completely inconceivably present in every magnificent moment, taking a little encouragement from so-called enlightened people like Jesus and Buddha and Muhammad and Moses and Rabbi Hillel and Krishna and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, taking encouragement that there is a way of being where you're completely present everywhere and yet specifically present just here in interaction with others. And when you feel that way, then you're completely competent to make everything nicer here, because you're not trying to manipulate it in any way that might be unpleasant to anybody else. So that's a wonderful possibility, you know.
And one of the things I've learned is that the perception we have of ourselves is often misconceived. It's a misperception, and so it is often driven by anxiety or trauma or ideas we have that we are, but that is not congruent with who we actually are. And for me, that kind of alignment, when that happened, when I stripped away all the things I'm not, and then I got something that is completely different. And what I see here is more like a faith in myself, where I usually used to doubt myself or didn't love myself. And so as a teen, that's the phase I was going through, because my family is dysfunctional. Then I was living in Germany. I was a foreigner there. And so it felt like I was out of place.
Where did you come from? Where were you?
In Germany. I was born in Iran, but I grew up in Germany.
You were born in Iraq yourself? Oh,
Iran, Iran. Yeah. And so it was just all this.
Oh, Iran, you were born in Iran. So you, Farsha Baladi. Which I don't, that's all I remember.
You were there, you traveled through Iran.
I traveled there, and I enjoyed it a little bit, although I felt people were a bit unhappy with the Shah at the and those times that I drove through Iran.
And they're still unhappy now. So it's something that continues, unfortunately. But just that idea of like, we're often like limited by things, and we identify with things that is not really probably representing us, and that could be religion. And the idea, you mentioned blind faith, and I completely agree with you, because when people talk about faith, they often are talking about blind faith, and that is not something you want. And faith is kind of Buddha empowered faith. That's what I want, and that's what I'm finding.
That means Buddha empowered sort of means reasonable.
Exactly.
You know, in other words, using your inference. For example, if you use your inference to realize that you've been unconscious 1/3 of your life, all the way from birth, which is because you were sleeping for 8 hours out of 24 very often. And that's 1/3 of the day, right? Approximately, sometimes more or less. But in all those times when your mind was nothingness, it was in nothingness in the sense of being unconscious, except when you're dreaming, but you didn't disappear. You didn't fall into nothingness. So, and not only that, but every night you felt better the next morning, pretty usually. You know, you're on the new day for Arash, and off you went. And that means that there's some energy that was invisible in the universe that came up and filled up the tanks in all your little cells. and your brain and your
and it's also we
and
live.
so by inference, you can understand that this transparent place, which is not nothing, and actually there's some abundant energy that sort of made you feel better.
Mhm.
And so, I want to go back to what you said was so interesting. You said you got to like yourself and you stopped disliking yourself. And this is very key. It's not just religion, it can be science also, or secularism, or a political ideology.
Mhm.
Human beings' minds works and language work in such a way that we can get a fixated idea of Arash.
Mhm.
He's really good, or he's really bad, or he's this, or he's that, or the other. And that fixated idea then sits in force on an Arash that has infinite potential, actually.
Mhm.
And then often, then in the social situation in human history, the authorities in different societies, they use religion or they use science, and they oppress everybody. Well, you're just what we say you are, and you have to be our slave, and you go die because we don't like the people in the next country or next tribe, and you have to do this and that, and you can't have fun because then you're using your energy instead of working for us, you're having fun with it, et cetera, et cetera. And so the whole thing is to avoid these fixated ideologies, whether religious or secular, that imprison us in some limitation that we are actually living, we are more than.
Yes, yes.
And we are when we're free, we will tend, but then that self that is more than any particular fixated thing, we have to be responsible ourselves for its kind of multiplicity, and that in faced with situations we can have impulses and drives that would make it worse, and we have ones that will make it better. And so we do need still in the process even of liking, we can still, as who said, the great Zen master actually in San Francisco said, I love the way he said it in English. He said, well, of course, everything is perfect, but there's always a little room for improvement.
I like that.
Which I really like that. That's sort of how it is, and I think. And so freedom is the basis of being a cheerful Arash.
Yes. Yeah.
And being imprisoned in this and that is always stressful. And there's always a problem about it.
But one of the issues is we always live also on autopilot. So it's like I see people who are like worried about things that don't matter. I'm one of them as well. I was one of them more than I'm now. Now I feel more liberated, and I can respond to things in different ways. And I can be overwhelmed by these ideas and the stress and so on. Or I can say, no, I have faith in my own abilities and I am fine. I'm going to get through this and get through all these challenges. And it's that kind of shift that is so liberating, and that idea of freedom, I can directly relate to that. And it's like and I love the idea of Buddhism, where you say mountains are mountains, and they're not mountains, and they're back to mountains. And I feel I went to that transformation because there was a time where everything was not fine. Then I went through, and then I went back. And basically, I do the same things. My actions are the same. I say the same things pretty much, but I feel differently inside. My relationship with everything around me has changed, has shifted. And that kind of like, I think like enlightenment.
But the thing is, when you say first they're mountains, and then they weren't, and then they were, right? But then once they are the second time, it's a little different.
Yes.
Because you're open to them not being mountains. Or the way you relate to them is more relaxed. You let them be mountains. Yes. You're not trying to make them mountains, only mountains, and always mountains, and my mountain, and just that mountain, et cetera, et cetera.
And it relaxes.
That's not mountains. Once you see through them, they become transparent in some time, which happened with you. Then you're more relaxed in hanging out with the mountain.
Yes, and it's we want to always be right. When you or your ego is kind of small, you want to be right, and being wrong is the worst thing that can happen to you. But then when I went through that process, I would admit, okay, I am wrong, and it felt very liberating. It actually felt very good to admit that.
It It still
Yeah.
does. It
It is,
can.
and that is like, I don't have to be right all the time, and I don't have to be perfect. And that idea of a perfect life or perfectionism, I think is misguided. I like the quote you gave us. And so it's basically, I like another quote I read where you do everything the same way you did, but your feet are slightly above the ground. So a couple of inches above the ground. And that's how I feel, because I wake up in the day and I feel blissful and joyful regardless of what. And it's just when for example I take nature walks, I pay more attention to things that I didn't hear before, like birds singing, or looking at trees or ducks. And so I think the idea is kind of similar to Plato. I think of the cave, where I feel like I was able to step out of that cave. And I like to give we have a hamster, so I like to give the idea maybe of a hamster cage, and I'm the one who managed to escape. But then when you come back, and I always want to come back, then it's kind of hard to transmit that to others, except leading by example, perhaps. But it's kind of a bit challenging to talk about that.
So you could write your own Wisdom is Bliss book.
I'm working on it. Yes.
Please go ahead.
I am working on it. But the idea of enlightenment too, the enlightenment. Again, I misunderstood that, but light could be is light, bright light, but enlightenment is also kind of a liberation of feeling weightless, kind of like the unbearably beautiful lightness of being, where you feel light. And that's I feel lighter. And that is, I think, a part that I didn't understand in terms of enlightenment, because I thought this flash of light would come. It hasn't happened. And I like to be more a bodhisattva, if that's possible, of like, if that should happen, I want to make sure everybody else is fine, and just like, but is that a reasonable conception of enlightenment?
Certainly. Well, in that line, what you see, this issue of, that's another thing that I'm sort of trying to figure out, still working on to get it more and more deeper. It's like when you look at your face in the mirror in the morning, when you shave or whatever you do, brush your teeth, and you see Arash in there, another Arash. And when you were a baby, maybe at one point you reached at the mirror when you were little and you tried to touch that person you saw through the window. And then you clunked into the mirror surface. And then, and there are some, there are many stories like the lion who was tricked by the fox into wanting to fight with the vicious lion at the bottom of the well. And he was roaring at himself and reflected in the bottom of the well. And finally, the fox tricked him to jump in and attack the one there to get rid of him. He was a mean lion, so he got rid of the lion that way. And we have a dog who barks at himself we don't put any mirrors on the ground because he never stops. And he barks at himself and it reflected when the light is a certain way in the window, in a transparent door, a glass door. And he endlessly barks at that Pekingese that he sees in the door. But we don't, right? So that means that you see something and you see it in a distorted way, like there's some other Arash over there. And even left, right is reversed and all this. But you correct it without thinking. So that's just a mirror reflection, although you don't see it that way. So you can simultaneously see it wrong and know it right, simultaneously. And so the enlightenment is defined as being still engaged by freely with things that you could see through if you wished. You don't have to be engaged with them because you are beyond just being light. You actually are transparent to yourself, and you are simultaneously identifying with the other person, and everybody. You're empathetic with the whole universe. Actually, it's such a huge, it's such a huge thing when you try to describe it. It's really huge. It's inconceivable, but it is. But the mirror analogy is the best one because it's like you see it, and at the same time, it's not there. It's like you see the mountain, but you also know it's not the mountain only. And what that does is frees you to observe it much more deeply, even empathetically, like a CAT scan observes the condition of your body by merging with the condition of your body. Do you know what I mean? So that's a really, I think that's a that's almost an incredible thing. But but the reason I launched that is that the key concept there, the famous phrase clear light, the clear light of voidness and everything, which I still use, but I never write it now as two words. I write it in one word, as you notice in that book. It's written clear light, because the point of it is the clear part, not the light part. Because light, when we normally think of it, is opposed to dark. But transparent is beyond the duality of light and dark. So when you look through the window into darkness outside, you still don't see the window. You just see the darkness outside. So in a way, it's an object for you in that sense. But you see, and you see through it. You still see the transparency thing. You still interact with it. And if there's a bright light outside, then you see objects revealed by the bright light. So the point is, the transparent thing in another way is not that satisfying, because maybe when you're enlightened, you don't actually see yourself being enlightened. Maybe you're just everywhere in everything, and then but somehow weirdly capable of interacting with any particular thing that desires your interaction. This is and that what I'm talking about now is something we can't conceive of. That means inconceivable. But apparently that's how it's described. For example, in the Buddhist translation community nowadays, there are people who have had awakenings, and they are completely anti-enlightenment as a word. They don't like it. They don't want to hear about it. It's all awakening. It's all awakening. And the Tibetans, and the word in Sanskrit, Bodhi, or Buddha, which is all Buddha means, it's not a personal name. It means both awakening from a sleep, but also it means blossoming like a flower into like a seed or a bud. That was one thing, and then it blossomed into something else. And then they translated Buddha as Sangye in Tibetan. Sang meaning awakening from sleep, and Ge meaning expanding. Becoming magnificent, becoming infinite, or something like that. So, which is actually a really good word for enlightenment. But the reason that those translators don't like it is they think the Enlightenment, the Western one, it means the Western 17th century thing, when people began to look at and observe nature beyond the dogmas of the Catholic Church in the West, and they actually were helped by Islam at that time, who brought back the old Greek thing to them through Andalusia, and they had their Renaissance, because they'd been in Dark Ages. Europe was so backward, and they think they're so great, but actually they were the most backward bunch of drunken weirdos that you can think of. And so the point is that they think that's bad. These awakening people, they want to awaken to something, and they're too much thinking that Nirvana is somewhere else. And you're going to awaken, and then the world won't be there anymore, so nobody can bother you. And well, at least I'm not hurting anybody. I've abandoned they don't want to think I've abandoned my beloveds, but they were, they'll find something else. You know what I mean? That sort of thing. And that's, so we're engaged in that discussion. And the point is, it's both awakening and enlightenment. And the whole modern thing of looking at nature and not being controlled by religion to accept only dogmas. You know what I mean? Only something in one language, only something from one supposed absolute thing. That's only one of them. Like Vishnu is only the only thing. Allah is the only thing. Jehovah is the only thing. That's where it gets. And he doesn't even like it. He or she or whatever that is. The ultimate power, the ultimate energy, the ultimate love energy in the universe. So anyway, that's an important thing, I think.
But it's about being right. I mean, converting to this is the true religion. I am right and you are wrong. And it comes down to that. And it's a very small-minded view. For me, it's like religion is love, where you can't force the other person to love you.
Right.
It has to come from your own accord. And we're not seeing that. And we've seen throughout history where the ideas are good, but the way it's implemented, it's horrible.
In a way, you could say that the great founders, they did not perceive a religion. They perceived reality. And they said it was good. It was al-Rahim, to use the Arab, compassionate. It was, empty. The Buddhist slogan is voidness, compassion, indivisible. know,
like that.
or voidness, the womb of freedom. You can translate voidness as freedom, freedom, compassion, indivisible, or freedom, the womb of compassion. Seeing freedom as something like a membrane, a nurturing energy, transparent energy space, wherein you can be completely open to helping suffering, lessen suffering in others, in yourself and in others. And that's not a religion, actually. That's a scientific claim that is what, when you really can observe your own experience to the fullest, without imprisoning it in some preconceived idea, it will be goodness. It will be good. It will be happiness. It will be freedom. It will be bliss. So therefore, wisdom, and knowing that is called wisdom, and therefore wisdom is bliss.
And it's just dogma driven. And this is what I like about Buddhism, because there's much less of it, or in many cases you have more freedom, or there isn't any.
It's not a dogma in Buddha's case, because like a scientist, long before the good side of modern science, Buddha said, well, I know everything now, and I'm really happy, and it's really great. But you know what? My saying that will not include you in it by itself. So I can't really describe it to you because it's inexpressible. But I can encourage you only that you have the ability to understand it yourself. And the way you do it is you expand your understanding and your intelligence, because you have that amazing human intelligence. And the key thing is, don't just believe what other people say just because they say they look cute, or because they seem like a big shot, you know, or they can burn a bush. Just because they're burning a bush, you know, just because they're a burning bush. Well, okay, who are you? Oh, I am what I am. Well, great, but why should I listen to you? You know, you can talk to the bush, then the bush has to give you a good answer. You know, anyway, never mind. I don't want. And
just the idea of the original sin and Adam and Eve, and I'm just like baffled by that, because they're doing the right thing. They want wisdom, and so why do they get expelled? Why not embrace them and say you did well?
They didn't get expelled. It's just a story.
Yeah.
It's just a story that they made up in order to be able to boss people around and make them feel that their suffering is deserved, and therefore they should just be a slave to the social order. And they say that God wants you to, and so they then imagine somebody who's mean.
Yeah,
really. Yeah. You know, God is not mean. God is nice.
Yes.
You know, why would God want to? You know, God spoke to Buddha actually. And he said, look, tell people I try to do my best, but I'm not omnipotent. And they have their own responsibility about their experience. And I'll try to help them. And you should please help them and tell them when horrible things happen to them, that since there's no omnipotent person who did it to them, that some bad people might have done something to them, but they have their own part in it. They put themselves in the way of that person. They can work it out, you know, they can leave. And actually, this brings us up to the big thing that's in the book there, underlying, that everybody runs into, and that's the issue of death. What is death? Everyone thinks that's the worst thing, and they're so scared. And once they are scared of it, they think someone tells them something about it, and they think, okay, I'm going to go there. They have my ticket. You know what I mean? And the ticket is either I'll be nothing, and that's, well, not that cool, because I won't have ice cream. I won't have Nauru's feast. You know about Nauru's feast. I don't, you know.
Yeah.
And I won't have that, but never mind. At least I won't be choking to death or starving, you know. So I'll accept a sort of, you know, medium and aesthetic future. You know, because I imagine it's the future. I'm lying there like eternally asleep. That's the name of all the cemeteries, right? And that's a modern one. And the ancient one is, well, I've been miserable all my life, but at least I kept repeating the name of somebody else, and they'll take care of me later. That's what the religions tell you. Yeah. Whereas the final thing is, if you know that you don't die, and instead you still hang out, you're going to wake up just like you do it every morning, but you'll wake up in a different body. And when you do that, you know, you better know how to do that. Do you know what I mean? So you better be nice now, so you'll be in a nice body then. That's a very strong bridge to cross, of understanding that death is only embracing all infinite possibilities, and that because your body is no longer serving. And then when that's the case, how do I navigate with my mind? And how am I able to? Am I sure that my mind will make the right choices in like, am I conscious in a dream? And when I see a nightmare rising up in a dream, do I know how to deal with it in a dream to get past the nightmare? You know, there's a wonderful Tibetan story that I like that my friend Dr. Anita told me about. And this guy has a terrible time sleeping because he has a repeating dream where he's being chased by a monster. And he doesn't know what to do, and he tries different medicine. He goes everywhere, blah, blah, blah. Finally, he meets a sort of friendly guy, like a spiritual friend, like a teacher, who's not an authoritarian guy, but a teacher. And that teacher keeps saying to him, look, there's nothing I can tell you will help you. You just have to try to, instead of running away from that monster, just face the monster.
Yes.
Once and for all, and something, maybe it'll work out, but you can't keep running away. And so you have to sleep, and then when you sleep and the monster goes up, you face it. So finally, he keeps trying to do it, failing and running away, waking up sweating and heavily breathing. Finally, he turns around and he says to them, he faces that monster, and the monster pauses in chasing him because he faced it. Then he says to the monster, why are you chasing me all the time? And you know what the monster says?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's your dream.
That's it, facing your inner demons, and and once you do, you realize they're just kittens. It's not a monster, and you got it. Yeah.
And he says, I don't know. It's your dream. That's like now you have responsibility, or you have the agency, you have the freedom to react by scare and running away, or facing it and looking at it. So that's the issue about death. If we face death like that, and we realize that we can, it's our dream. And actually, this leads to a practice that is a very important one that they have in all religious, the good side of spiritualities, which is learning to consciously dream, to develop lucid dreaming ability. And actually, secularists and different psychological hospitals and things, they have developed abilities to teach people how to become a lucid dreamer, what they call a lucid dreamer. And that's really important. And I don't pretend I'm very good at it. I occasionally hit it, but most often I wake up remembering a dream. Oh, I wish I was still in there and I would have fixed this or changed that. And I failed, mostly. Yeah. I don't pretend anything. But I have tasted it a little bit, and it is really valuable. And it's a great step on the way to being lucidly awake and being really awake while we're awake.
And what I find fascinating, those who've had near-death experiences, they actually talk about it, and it's very similar, and regardless of what the traditions is and the belief system is, and it's actually very positive. And they say it's a wonderful, loving, comfortable feeling.
That's right.
Why are we worried about it if it's going to be fine? And that resonates with me. And the other thing is, why do we say this life is suffering, so my next life will be fine? I want this life to be joyful. I want this to be good. And being happy.
The only way to guarantee the next one will be joyful is to find the joy now.
Exactly.
And then you'll gravitate to what will be joyful then. If you're only miserable now, you might go towards some defense thing or some deeper way of defending yourself and closing yourself more. And that'll ensure that you're reborn in a more closed way, which will make you less capable of interacting effectively with the universe on whatever embodiment. So being joyful now, which always comes from opening your heart.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the more you open, the more joyful.
Absolutely. And a beacon of joy and hope is always and has always been for me the Dalai Lama. And you personally know him, so I'd like to know a bit about
he's so
Dalai Lama.
He's such a nice guy. I really love him. And what I love about him is also he doesn't try to trap you into sort of being dominated by him, which unfortunately a lot of spiritual teachers do. They unfortunately get stuck in the identity of being the great teacher, and then you're supposed to kowtow to them in some way. And you never should unless you do truly feel great gratitude because someone has really made you more free. And therefore, it's a contradiction of someone who will demand some sort of obsequiousness and some sort of servility from people right away just because there's some sort of a guru. And he doesn't do that at all. He's completely normal. And I have a story I tell about him that I love. When I was in the early years, I guess I had known him at that point for about 16 years, from 64 to 80. This happened in 1980. And 1980, I spent a year around him not as a monk anymore at that point, because by that time I had a family. I was an ex-monk. And I was leaving India at that time. I had to go back to work at the end of a sabbatical. I had to go back to work at my college. And I brought my 4 kids and wife in what's called the exit audience, in the little culture around him. And then I wanted to be very formal because he is my teacher. And so, I knew he doesn't like it. And normally when we would meet to work on some project, we were working on something, I'd just walk and say hi, and he'd say hi, and we'd just carry on like colleagues. But I wanted to make a bow, and I wanted to show to my children some sort of formal thing, because they didn't meet him every day like that. And my wife told me, don't bother. He won't like it. He doesn't like that kind of formalities. And you know that he doesn't. So why are you bothering with that? Well, I really want to show the kids, like I'm going like that. I'm trying to be the big righteous dad, So then I go in, and he's, I'm sure, clairvoyantly aware of all this discussion, right? So as I approach him, I fold my hands together like this, and I start the process of where you do a formal bow, and just like salam, in Islamic culture, that you do the same thing. I actually did my first salam full body prostration. I learned to do that in a tekka in Damascus of Sheikh Abdullah Dagestani's tekka in 1963 or 62, actually, when I spent a little time there. And that's the first place I learned to do a salam, So, but anyway, so I start to do that. So he pretends naughtily that I was only about to shake his hand. So he grabs the 2 hands with his right hand, and actually clasping it also in the left, and holds it there. So blocking my bow, actually, and what happens, I lose my balance and I flop over on the floor. and then he and my wife and the kids all laugh. And then everybody's having a hilarious moment where I'm flushed red, like so embarrassed I did the wrong thing, and a little bit flushed. But everybody else is laughing madly. And then my wife sort of gives me the "I told you so" look. And I think he and she exchanged knowing glances, I imagine. I don't know really, because I'm trying to get up again, but it's a big laugh. And he said, let's all sit down, and we're going to have tea together, because I had known him for 16 years at that time. And then we sort of got petted. Then we're all sitting down. Then suddenly there's this clanking, blanging noise in the room. And we look around, and the youngest one, who was 2 years old at the time, he starts swimming across the floor, doing the Australian crawl on a wooden floor of the room, because he thought that's what I was doing, and that's what you're supposed to do. So he's going like clank, clank, like this, crawling across the floor, although he was walking very well by the time. And he'd been gestured to sit down, but instead he's thinking that's the fun thing, because that's what we all did when we were laughing. Instead of talking is boring to him, And so we had another big laugh, Yeah. But so that's something about the Dalai Lama, how he has a little mischievous streak, yes. And he likes to keep friendly, and he doesn't doesn't put any airs on, and he totally follows the thing. He says he often in teachings likes to quote a particular verse where the Buddha says to his mendicants, the monks and nuns, he says, mendicants, a wise person only accepts something that some advice that another person gives them, after measuring it, thinking it over, trying it out in experience, like a goldsmith only buys gold in the market after melting it, cutting it, and rubbing it on a touchstone, and doesn't just accept somebody, this is pure gold, here, buy it. They don't do that. So that's the way you should listen to someone who says something, to use it like that, with your own critical thinking, with your own experiential experimentation, and putting it on the touchstone of what seems right to your intuitive insight. And that's the way you should be. And don't just do it because you think somebody's so great, I'm going to listen to whatever they say, and I'm just going to, that's going to be my new dogma. Yeah. And that's a verse, that's an ancient Buddhist verse. And he likes to recite that to them. And he reaches forward. You can see him when he's sitting on a teaching chair, leaning forward and saying, please, therefore, think about what I'm saying. Reject it if you don't like it. So I was going to ask you a question, Arash, last question. kind of, and that is there something you disagree with in the book that you read? Do you have any question that is like sort of critical, or that you're chewing over, or you're not sure about? I think you indicated, right, the 4 friendly fun facts. The first one is, if you're not awakened, everything's going to be stressful. Things are never going to everything doesn't quite fit in the samsara, Yeah. And that's the first noble truth, which then caused people to misunderstand Buddha as a purveyor of misery, like all religions tend to be, except for the mystic side of them. But they all tend to sort of rationalize misery. Whereas he's not only saying that because he discovered a way of being where everything is not suffering. So he's just saying, if you insist stubbornly on being right, or being rigidly into whatever your idea is, rather than being open to your experience, then you'll suffer, is what he said it. But do you still maybe a little bit uneasy with that first friendly, fun fact?
Yeah, one of the things I was thinking about, and I hadn't thought about it, that he had a son, and that he left his son. So the idea of family, like being a potential hindrance, is something that has me a bit worried, because I love my son.
Yes. Okay. Good.
Jesus did the same thing with his own folks, and that's fine. But it wasn't his child, and so the idea of abandoning your son, and I think his name was Rahula, right? Unwanted. Right. Oh yeah. I have a problem with that.
I know. Good. You are wonderful. But I don't really tell that story in that particular book, but that's good in general. So that means that you retain a healthy suspicion of everything what Buddha says. Good. Yeah. So, but what I'm saying there is, let's put it in a context. He told his dad too. He abandoned his dad. It was very harsh on it. It was much harder even on his dad than on his son, because his son was brought up as he had been brought up, by lots of loving moms. And that's almost more important to a kid for quite a while, and he knew that. And his dad said, well, you can't go because, now you had a son, and the Indian tradition then was, when the crown prince has a son, then the father can abdicate and take a long-term, can retire young, if they, in those days, maybe in the 50s, and then really enjoy their elder time, go to an ashram, and be more spiritual, be more relaxed, and not have to sit in court and make decisions, or even make war, or, all kinds of horrible duties that a leader has. And the father was very anxious to retire, of course, with his wives, to his ashram and be emperor in retirement, happily, king in retirement. And so the son said, well, Dad, you told me, though, if I'm going to be a king, that a king has to solve the people's problems, right? Yes, son. Well, Dad, I now have an understanding what my people's problems are, thanks to my wife, who showed me a little more reality than you ever let me see by keeping me in my pleasure palace. And I noticed that people's realities are not really defense, health, education, and welfare. I mean, there are people taking care of those things, but that's not really what their real problems. Their real problems are old age, death, the difficulties of life, especially death they're afraid of, deep sickness that can't be cured, and how to deal with it. And I believe there's a kind of way I can really help them with that. And he said, no, what are you talking about? You want to be a priest, but you're not a priest, you're a prince. He said, no, I think the priests and the gods are not dealing with it to the people's satisfaction. They're telling them a story, but I don't think they really know how to handle it. And I think I can do better, he said. Mm-hmm. And so then the dad did what they do in that circumstance. He locked him up, called in the shrinks, which were the Brahmin priests. And then he escaped. So the idea was he didn't feel he was abandoning. He felt there was something better for them than the ordinary life that they were living within the caste system, within the royal system, and in which his job would be commander-in-chief of the army, actually, because he was the warrior class, which was actually the top power class, So he left, and he sought his way. It took him some years because of the backwardness of his culture. And then he finally became enlightened. And then apparently he helped everyone extremely well. And then there's a famous story about when he came back after about 10 years, when he was already a grand master, you could say, but freeing people, though, not just domineering them with a new cult, a new Brahminical cult, ordering them. but really creating an institution for them to educate themselves to be free. And people were dropping out of all castes, and he accepted plenty of people from lower castes, and even accepted women, which at first was very stressful to the patriarchal society that he was in. And women were so grateful. And so then he came back, and at that point, his wife didn't come to teach. The only person in the whole kingdom who didn't come to teach to his teaching. And he didn't let the son go either. And the son was like a teenager, like a teen, like you say, looking for his values. And he wanted to go, but she wouldn't let him. So finally, he said, Mom, look, everybody's going and hearing Dad teach, and you got to let me go. Come on. And finally, she said, okay, I'll let you go on one condition. And he said, well, what is that? And he said, I'll let you go on the condition that you ask him after the teaching, go up to him, be brave, go up to him and say, I'm your son, Rahula. Can I have my inheritance, please? And of course, Buddha was a propertyless mendicant, right? Mm-hmm. And so there was a little barb in that because, and actually when he left, in quoting all the stories, she was, you know why she was mad? Not because he abandoned the child. She was mad because she couldn't go with him. She wanted, if he wanted to, and she was the one actually who had showed him in some versions of the story. She was the one who had showed him the sick guy, the old guy, the dead body, and the ascetic, the seeker of, the Sufi, the seeker of enlightenment, the four visions, that got him out of the pleasure palace, the unrealistic pursuit of ordinary egocentric pleasure. So he didn't see pleasure. So he goes and he listens to his dad and he's thrilled, he's excited. At the end, he goes up, he says, oh, Mr. Shakyamuni, Mr. Buddha, I'm actually your son, Rahula. And I apologize for what I'm about to say to you, but I promised my mom I would. He says, oh, it's okay. You can say anything, whatever you like. He says, could I please have my inheritance? So then Buddha says, okay, come here, mendicant. He says, ehi bhikkhu. He says, come here, mendicant. And then the son walks toward his dad like he's going to get a hug. And when he comes into where the shadow of the sun, the shadow, his father, he's in his father's shadow, he attains nirvana automatically. Yeah. The field is so powerful. And of course, his previous karma from previous life. I mean, they have lots of other ways of explaining it. But he really finds freedom. And he attains a higher perception of things. And he feels like bliss welling up inside him and so on. So then Buddha said, and he becomes a mendicant automatically. He joins the movement. And the dad says to him, how's that for an inheritance? And that's great, he says. But then he says, and then he already, because he becomes what they call an arhat, a free person, one who has conquered the enemy of suffering, he then said, and then therefore considerate of others, intensified. He then says, but listen, Dad, something, Mom is really stuck and isn't coming to see you. So I think we should go see her. Never mind, you're the head monk and a mendicant or whatever. We can go see her, your ex, Well, of course, I have been wanting to do that, Buddha then says. And then they do go see her. And then they have a nice conversation. And she tells her complaint that he didn't take her along. And he says, well, you probably didn't need that. You probably know yourself. Whatever, he gives her wisdom as bliss. Yeah. Teaching of some sort, much better than I'm doing it, really able to do it. And then she and his foster mother, Prajapati, Mahaprajapati, they are the two ladies who really push to have the female mendicant community accepted by the society. In other words, they make Buddha speak to the patriarchs, to his father, the king, and to everybody else. We're really going to seriously have female mendicants, because there had been some trepidation about doing that, because the one slave that the patriarchal household doesn't want to let go of is the mom. Mm-hmm. Because she bears the children, she cooks the food, she plants things, she weeds the garden, she cleans the house, she does all the essential work to making life possible, actually, for everybody, right? And highly male chauvinist societies, they don't want to have to pay her the price, So those are the stories about it. But of course, it's a problem, and there are some, like the next Buddha, supposedly, who comes on earth, Maitreya, who's called the loving one. he doesn't have to leave for 6 years because he's in a time in the planet that it's much more civilized and the culture is better, and he just is transferred. He steps out of his role as a Brahmin, not a warrior, kshatriya, not the military class, but the priest class. And he receives the sacrificial post from his father, a jewel post. He shatters the post because he's not going to sacrifice anything anymore. And he gives shards of the jewel to everybody else. And he attains enlightenment immediately, like in one day. So they don't, I don't know, but I bet they do, but actually I'm ignorant of the story. I don't know whether he must have had a family as a regular police class guy, so he doesn't have to leave the family, in other words.
Okay.
So that's a more ideal thing. Buddha sort of had to leave it maybe because the family was where you kind of trapped in a militaristic male chauvinist society. And it's important that to open that society, this was necessary. Who else leaves and abandons their children, by the way, normally and considered fine in societies? Can you answer that question for me?
I'm not sure.
Soldiers do.
Soldiers, right. Okay. Yeah.
And they go and join the army, and then they go and they're ready to die. And they often do, actually, unfortunately.
And that's something I would never do.
And they completely abandon the family, right? And not only that, but they destroy other people's families. And it's really, and so the soldier does that. And don't forget, Buddha was raised and trained to be a general soldier. So he realized to overcome the militaristic, patriarchal, casteist society, there had to be a kind of military adventure that was nonviolent, where the enemy was the inner ignorant being, and where people put the full militancy and sort of life and death commitment to transforming and conquering their own harmful habit, which was ingrained in them by society. So the need for the monastic is sort of like an internalized military, you could say. And actually, I did a lot of studies in my academic career where I invited Christian priests and Sufis and all sorts of people about monasticism. And all of the founders of monastic orders, East and West, were ex-military people, actually, usually. And therefore, they created an institution in the middle of knights in armor and conquering hordes and whatever it is, of people who would rather, as I tend to put it in my sort of millennial thinking, when you have more people in a society willing to die not to kill another person, in other words, put their life on the line for nonviolence, then are willing to die to kill another person, then you have peace in the world. And that's the transition we're facing today, actually, in this day of yet another huge military failure, that we're seeing, which is an utter failure, and the way of life. Once you have a militaristic external society, your internal one will be a police state, of course, because that's the internal military. And then people will have a policing on their own original sin.
And that's the opposite of freedom.
Suffering, and they'll all be beating up their women and not paying their salaries. And so the planet is at this great time, actually. I'm very millennial and optimistic about it, where since the World War, even since Gandhi, it's been obvious to everyone that war is completely impossible and no one can win it. And there's even a great book. Do you know Jonathan Schell's book? Did you ever hear of Jonathan Schell? He was a great writer. I think maybe he is. I keep forgetting whether he's passed or not, but he's a little older than me. But he was a great writer, and he wrote a wonderful book called The Unconquerable World: Power, Nonviolence, and the Will of the People. Okay. Good. And it's really a really wonderful book. And it has nothing to do with Gandhi or Buddhism or any theory of nonviolence. It begins with an analysis of von Clausewitz. I don't know if you know, he's a theorist of war from Prussia, in the 1930s or something, which is sort of the political science people, sort of Machiavellian, modern, that's the theory of war. War is diplomacy by other means. You beat the other guy's army, then you make the other guy's country do something subservient to you, in a deal you couldn't make as a diplomat, and at the end of it is the war, and then you win the battle. You don't even necessarily exterminate all the other troops. You just get them to surrender, right? And then the other people have to sow something for you or give you their resources at a cheaper price or whatever it is. Well, now what's the theory of war? You can't go to war, Powell doctrine, unless you're ready to destroy the other country completely. And who's going to do your bidding, and what benefit do you get out of that? None, right? So then you have terrorists after you, in fact, because they're so pissed off they've lost their family or their land or their house or their whatever, or their leg or whatever it is. So in other words, war no longer has a useful purpose, right? But
vicious cycle, yeah.
But the people who used to have power that way are not willing to give up. Like Russia said, fuck it. Actually Russia, under the czars, I don't know if you know that, under the czars, the Russians in 1907, they said, we're sick of international war, and they called for some big conference in The Hague, and they said, no more wars, we're not doing them anymore. But forget about huge Russia,
Yeah.
They did. And then who screwed them up? Some stupid American admiral and some British guy and some French guy. They went in there and they torpedoed that. It was a big international disarmament thing he tried to summon everybody to at The Hague. And Russia is a big country, so the people came. But then those Western people, the imperialists at the time, right, they blew up the idea. It's interesting. Russia was a leader there, It's interesting, actually. And then, of course, they reproduced, instead of communism, they reproduced the Tsar, with the Bolsheviks. And then they blew that up with Gorbachev and Yeltsin. And then KGB reasserted itself through Putin, and now all the former KGB people are the oligarchs. So those people's point of view are not letting go. It's like here, in America, the Pentagon and the defense contractors and the paid-off politicians won't quit, even though they totally lost Vietnam. They bombed the living crap out of the whole place, but they totally lost. They could never manage Afghanistan because they were too stupid to deal with the reality of Afghanistan. And the Pakistanis defeated them. I love that. I don't love it, but General Gould, you know what he said? Did you read that?
I don't know.
General Gould said, America is great, but Allah is greater. He said, first, the Americans paid us to destroy the Russians in Afghanistan, and then the Americans kept paying us to destroy the Americans.
Oh my God! Yeah.
I knew that the whole time. Taliban would have been, originally were pumped up by us to go attack religious fanatically the Russians, and then they turned against us when we occupied the country. But actually, people who helped the Northern Alliance get rid of Al Qaeda and so forth after they bombed us, Bin Laden, and no Afghanis were on those planes, all Saudis. Anyway, they do that. Then the special ops people who were there told their superiors at the Pentagon or wherever, don't occupy this country. If you occupy it, then you're the bad guys again, no matter what you're doing, just because you're occupying them. They don't like to be occupied, and nobody does. And did they listen? No. And then this is the result, 20 years later, and $3 trillion and thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people. Yesterday, I'm not finished quite. We're almost done. And I know I'm off the topic. You don't need to use all this, but this is, I want people to cheer up. And militarism and police state behavior, it doesn't cheer anybody up.
Yes.
And also not respecting the women doesn't cheer anybody up. Yeah. And pink supremacy, what I call. I don't call it white supremacy. There's no white people. They're pink.
White pink.
No, you're not white and I'm not white. We're pink. Our faces are pink.
I see.
Right? Yeah. If we're white, that's because we're terrified. You're white when we see a ghost.
Yeah.
People are seeing ghosts. We're pink people, and most of those pink people are in search of a tan. So they'd like to be brown. They'd like to be a POC, person of color. But they're pink, is what they are. I said that's my message to the Proud Boys.
Yes. I wanna finish on definition
Okay.
of the word Buddhism, and I might blush here.
Oh yeah,
Let's finish on a high note and a climax. And so, can you just
well,
tell everyone what is it? Yeah.
I'm purposely connecting it to that
Yeah.
because who I love. You said you had your tour with Freud and everybody,
Yes.
and you love them, and I like them too, Freud and Jung and their successors. And I actually DJ Winnicott, you know him?
No.
Oh
yeah, Winnicott. Yeah.
Oh, and Mark Epstein, current guy, my neighbor here, he is so great. He's the apostle of Winnicott, and he's a Buddhist. He's a mindfulness Buddhist psychiatrist. He's so great. If you don't know his book called what do you call the Teachings Not Given or something like that? Advice Not Given: How to Get Over Yourself. He has a great book, his latest book. He's writing another one now, but that's a really great psych book if you like psych books. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, I love Wilhelm Reich. When I was a kid, before I even knew Buddhism, I loved Wilhelm Reich. And Wilhelm Reich, his great book was The Function of the Orgasm, and as a psychologist. Yeah. But his definition of it, although was not what we normally think of in normal procreative sexuality, actually, it was not. And he didn't know about Tantra, and he didn't know about, sort of advanced high yogas and blah, 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 which I absolutely don't want to get into now. But he didn't know about that. But yet he said what he called orgasmic potency is someone who's so open in their own inner sensitivity that they feel a streaming when they connect or they become nearby and they go in a dyad with someone of the opposite sex. And they don't do the sort of thrusting and, huffing and puffing. They just lie tenderly and gently together. They don't have the sort of struggle kind of aspect so much or at all. I don't know. I forget. He doesn't really give detail, but they just lie. And then if they lie in a certain way, observing each other peacefully, eventually both become enfolded in a blue energy, which he calls orgone energy, and they're completely transported into rapture, the two of them, but full body. In other words, they feel it all over their body, rather, not just sort of what the psychologists call genitally organized orgasm. And that is something that their advanced inner deep meditations that the Indians developed and the Tibetans followed, because you have to realize they were so much less prudish than, because they became less militaristic, because Buddha, their greatest general in the ancient time, became a general of the monastics. And nonviolent people created a nonviolent army inside their country, which ultimately made them vulnerable for about 1,000 years. But they then produced Gandhi, Although now they have weapons and there's a mixed bag at the moment, but they'll get there, I think, because that is the message. That's the answer to the planet. It relates to democracy and women, and the non-subservience of women. And anyway, so that's Wilhelm Reich, and so that's what I meant. So Buddhism is when one has a freedom feeling, and then he had a concept called the emotional plague, because he lived in Germany in the same time as Freud, and I think he was a little younger. He was a student of Freud and a contemporary of Jung. And then he saw the destruction of the Weimar Republic and the rise of Nazism and fascism in Spain and Italy. And then he thought the Bolsheviks for a while were going to be liberated, and then they became fascist. They turned Russia back to fascism under a new name, although they killed the Tsar, but then they became new czars. And then he came to America, and then the McCarthy era and the rise of white supremacy and stuff, basically the slave mentality still in America, they started getting after him. And so he called that the emotional plague. And he connected it to a kind of most brilliant analysis of military posture, how a soldier is trained with the chin rammed down on the throat, the diaphragm imprisoned by the stomach sucked in very tightly, and the pelvis retracted, pulled back to prevent streaming, internal streaming, blissful, happy streaming. And in order to feel armored, what do you call it, neuromuscular armoring, to armor them against sensations of empathy and sensitivity, to enable them to be brutal and violent and kill, and kill an old woman, whereas they started out before they were recruits where they wouldn't harm their grandmother. But now they're ready to shoot some village woman, if in case she might have a bomb under her cassock or whatever, over her, under her shawl or whatever it is, But still, it's a violent, brutal thing. So he calls that the emotional plague. And he says anybody with that emotional plague who doesn't develop psychology to open up the internal nervous system, that person wants fascism in a country, and they want a fascist type authority so that everybody is armored against everybody, and et cetera, and then they of course want to rise in the pecking order, so they beat more people than they get beaten by, but they fit into that, and it's really brilliant. And I really like that guy, and I'm sure he's the reincarnation of some Tibetan yogi or Indian yogi. I have absolutely no doubt, really. And so that's where Buddhism comes from, and also from Buddhist Tantra, where they do a kind of Reichian therapy through meditative practice, and they kind of open up the inner feeling, and one finds that bliss, that there's an inner bliss through sublimation, and that's another reason why it's necessary for people who have that emotional plague to leave the family, because in the family they're going to reproduce the pattern that they inherited from the father in the patriarchal militarized society family. And it doesn't mind what religion it is, they'll make whatever religious ideology fit with that domination type of pattern, and that's been going on for 5,000 years, and all kinds of religions have some the founders, people like Jesus, like the great Sufis, like Mansur al-Haq, that guy, or they get wasted by the authoritarians. Of course, they get sacrificed by them because they don't like them telling people, look, you can be free, you don't have to march in the army. That's what they always tell people, and then the authority doesn't like them saying that, so they destroy them. The Romans, destroyed Jesus, not the Jews. The Romans. He was a Jewish rabbi, a great one, and the Romans killed him. So anyway, so that's Buddhism. That's what I mean.
Thank you so much for
because when you sublimate those energies, you find every male has a female side, actually.
Yes.
Every female has a male side.
No, I mean, I think it's both. I mean, that's in harmony.
Yeah.
That's
so there's a kind of inner release. There are inner releases of self-confining and self-constricting neural patterns that prevent one from feeling anything, and therefore you get a phenomenon like our current non-president, who just occupied our White House by confusion, by the force of confusion, but never really served, because he didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing, serving others, because he was unable to, because he doesn't, but that's why he grabbed so many females proudly, because he didn't know what to do with any one of them, because he couldn't feel anything in himself, but he was desperate to try. So he thought power would do it. But that doesn't do it ever. It makes it worse. The more people want from you, and then you're incapable of doing anything to them because you feel you got nothing yourself. So that makes you completely hopeless. And that guy never took any oath of office. People don't realize that. You don't watch American politics, I know. Yeah. I hope up there you're safe in Canada. Yeah. But people now should reflect. They're all against him because he's not accepting this election result. But he said he wouldn't accept the first election result unless he won, remember? So he never thought to uphold democracy, and that's the job of a president. So therefore he never was one. He just moved his business into the House, which shouldn't be white anyway. It's pink. It should only be a pink house.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for such stimulating and wonderful discussions and food for thought.
I'm sorry to veer into politics.
Absolutely.
But for me, it's not veering, because inner freedom means we must be devoted to outer freedom. And I don't mind those guys. They think they're seeking freedom by not getting vaccinated, isn't that? And it's just a confusion. They would be more free if they did get vaxxed, but never mind, let them try to be free. But when that freedom is harmful to other people, it is kind of too bad. So they should have to pay a little bit of a price, like Macron just did. They can't go to the cafe
Which I applaud. That's wonderful.
8 million French people who love their cafe, 8 million of them went out and got injected.
Yes. That's how it works. And the idea of freedom is just misunderstood by many. They think they're free, but they're enslaved. They're actually more enslaved than others.
To be enjoyed. And then you can't enjoy if you're harming somebody else. So that's easy. Okay, listen, love you. I love you,
Thank you
Arash.
so much. Thank you. This was
I'm sorry that I can't translate it into Farsi. I wish I could write wisdom is bliss. How would you say wisdom is bliss in Farsi? How would you say that?
That's good. Actually, it's for me, Farsi is actually a language that I know least of the ones that I know. I grew up there. I mean, I was born there, but I didn't grow up there.
Oh, so you don't know the language. Shuma Farsi Baladine.
Yekam. A little bit, yeah.
Sir,
but thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
I really love the Persian people. You know, the Persian people are really nice, sweet, you know, and they are totally interrelated with the Indian people from ancient time. And there was really no barrier between them, you know, and even the Achaemenids never had felt they had to go and beat up the Indians. They didn't try even, you know. And they went west to the more rough people on their western frontier, you know, and south, you know, but they never bothered to mess with the Indians because they were importing all kinds of goodies from there. So why bother to conquer it? You know? And the Indians liked them. In fact, there's a story that Bimbisara, the king of Magadha and the seed of the Mauryan Empire, after Alexander, he made the first painting of the Buddha during his life, which, you know, some people don't agree. They think it's a myth, might be, but I believe it's real. And he painted that and to send to his friend who was the Achaemenid, I don't know which Xerxes or Darius II, to send him a picture because he knew he would never come to India to see the Buddha. So he sent him a portrait of the Buddha. He thought he might enjoy seeing the weird looking E.T. conehead Buddha. And that's a cute story, which I like. Okay, listen, all the best.
Thank you very much. It was such a pleasure. Take care. All the best to you.
Let me know when you publish it or whatever you do.
I will send you the link. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.